It is Transfiguration Sunday. And so we will read Exodus 24. The word of the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain, and wait there, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandment, which I have written with fire." I don't know where that came from. "Which I have written for their instruction." Wow. Maybe he did. I mean, etching stone, that's, wow. Okay. So Moses set out with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up into the mountain of God. To the elders he had said, "Wait here for us until we come to you again. For Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a dispute may go to them." Then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. On the 7th day, he called to Moses out of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. I knew we'd get to the fire eventually. Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain. Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. And with that as a prelude, we move to Matthew 17. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John, and led them up a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. And his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Here ends today's reading.
Well, the story of the Transfiguration, the disciples' vision, is a mountaintop experience of the sort we see in the tales of the Old Testament. Think of the prophet Elisha watching in wonder as the chariots of Israel and its horsemen take Elijah out of this world in a whirlwind. And the story of Exodus, in Exodus of Moses ascending Mount Sinai through the smoke of God's fire, which Marc just read to us. Now, the New Testament telling of the transfiguration of Jesus is found in all 3 of the synoptic gospels. Synoptic is a fancy word, the ones that sound alike: Matthew, Mark, Luke, not including John, who has many different things to say. So it's found in all of those, and in all of them, the story is largely the same. But the version that's found in Matthew, read today, reflects something of the audience to which Matthew was addressing his message, who he was primarily speaking to, the late 1st century Jewish followers of Jesus. Remember, by this time, it is a religion that's gone beyond Judaism and involved the Gentiles. But Matthew speaks more directly to the Jewish audience. As Thomas O'Brien wrote in his commentary for today's message in his work, Scripture in Context, portraying Jesus as the Messiah as a new Moses would have been seen as a fulfillment of words attributed to Moses in Deuteronomy. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people. You shall heed such a prophet. Jesus, being with Moses and Elijah, showed his and his teachings continuity with and fulfillment of the great lawgiver Moses and the prophetic precursor Elijah to the Messiah. So tying it all together, fancy way to say tying it all together. In the transfiguration, Jesus's face shone just as Moses's face did after his last trip up the mountain. Jesus's clothes were dazzling white, the same description as the ancient one in Daniel's vision in the book of Daniel. And the disciples falling to the ground is similar to Daniel's reaction to his visions and falling to the ground. Even if the story of the transfiguration has a profound similarity to the way God comes to dwell on earth in Hebrew texts, which seems evident, there's more and more, I didn't put the long list of things in, that does not make the transfiguration any less real. In fact, the repetition of the description of the way the bright light of the Hebrew Shekinah, how do you say that, folks? Shekinah? It's the light, and it means the dwelling of God, comes to humanity throughout the Old Testament. And it may be a way to guide us to see the transfiguration as that much more real. Jesus invited Peter and James and John, Jesus's inner circle, to come up the mountain with him. Now, this invitation came at a crucial time. Jesus had just informed the disciples of the coming fate, that he would suffer, be rejected by the authorities and killed. They responded with shock and dismay. Were they supposed to understand and accept that the ignominious suffering was the fate of the Messiah? There was little comfort in Jesus's promise that he would rise up on the third day. Almost in the same breath, the disciples were told that they too must be willing to be scorned and to sacrifice their own lives for the sake of the gospel. Now, 6 days later, of course, we heard about that in the passage from Moses too, didn't we? 6 days later, in the wake of this dark news, the disciples find themselves privy to a shining vision. Jesus's presence is illuminated from within, and his garments become whiter than white. Moses and Elijah appear with him, and a voice out of a cloud speaks the now unquestionable reality. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. We've heard that somewhere else. I think in the Gospel of John, maybe in all of them after the baptism. The disciples' vision appears for only a brief moment in their lives. Perhaps it's an externalization of an inner spiritual experience. I'm not trying to mess around with you here, but perhaps that's what it is, an external manifestation of an internal spiritual experience. But whatever it is, it appears to them. The disciples could not have anticipated it, and they cannot sustain it in all its glory. This brief moment is almost too powerful and leaves them terrified. A voice comes out of a cloud, and then suddenly it's over. And they follow Jesus down the mountain. In their offer to build dwellings for the holy ones before them, what's that about? Do you have a thought on that? I say we see how badly they want to hold on to the experience, to contain it, to house it, to give it tangibility. When this offer is rejected by Jesus, they perhaps imagine that they will at least be able to fashion it with a container of words, a story that they can tell. And this telling permit them to hold on tight to that vision. But Jesus says no, in no uncertain terms, to tell no one about what they have seen. Shakily, they come down the mountain and in a daze return to their everyday lives. Now they must face their mundane responsibilities. They must live with their unanswered questions and the doubt, fear, and grief that is on the horizon for Jesus and for themselves. Maybe you can even relate to that experience on some minor level, where you just have to live in the unknowing, and you know that there's something more important, but you still have to do the dishes and go to work and to change the diapers. They've experienced a shining vision, an eternal moment that time cannot erase, and that uncertainty will not deny. They stood on a pinnacle in the radiant presence of a theophany, fancy word for an appearance of the divine, that will inspire them forever. The ancient Hebrews, Greeks, and Christians placed great value on the heights. Moses received the 10 Commandments on the mountain. The Greek gods rewarded people by tossing them up into the sky, where they could be permanently remembered as constellations. Jesus gave his Sermon on the Mount. Our modern language continues to reflect our love affair with the lofty over the lowly. An adult is a person who's grown up. My generation didn't learn that, but hopefully those following. When we are happy, we are said to be in high spirits. When someone begins to achieve worldly success, they're referred to as a rising star. And conversely, when someone is sad, we say they are down in the dumps. When someone's health fails, we say they are going downhill. And yet, this story of the Transfiguration doesn't stop with a description of a mountaintop vision, but with what takes place after the vision while coming down the mountain. As their collective pulse slows to a normal pace and their breathing returns, Jesus orders them to tell no one what they have seen until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. The rest of Jesus's ministry and his tutoring of his disciples will take place before that foretold event. Going downhill is the beginning of a very productive time. The gospel takes us to the mountaintop, but religious life takes root when we descend the mountain. Going downhill, that's what we were beginning to talk about in Sunday school, very different, the way the river goes downhill. Going downhill presents a great spiritual challenge, but at the same time creates a powerful opportunity for every human soul. When you think about it, all human life begins with a pretty terrifying downhill journey. Do you know where I'm going? Huh? We literally slide head first from our mother's womb, at birth diving deep into this pool of life. We descend into wet, slippery, vulnerable pool. Wait a minute, I lost my place. We descend into I got so caught up in the image. We descend into life, that's it. We descend into life, wet and slippery and vulnerable. The mountaintop the disciples got to glimpse, and the ones most of us yearn to reach in our lives, isn't a faint, imaginative future dream. The mountaintop was our original home. We started out on the mountain, in the realm of the spirit, and as infants in utero, the spirit incarnated, came into the body, descended into earthly life. For our allotted time here, our primary task is to seek our destiny in our spiritual roots. Our future is actually a return to our beginning. As some of us get to about my age, 68 now, you begin looking at life a little differently, don't you? There's not as much coming up as there has been on the other side. And you think about the beginnings and the endings and what that cycle, either linear, what we see sometimes linearly, but how it is a cycle of life. In the Jewish mystical tradition that underlies both Judaism and Christianity, there is a symbol that is helpful in getting our imaginations around this idea, and that is the tree of the Kabbalah. Ever heard of that? I talked about it before. Two different symbols of the tree of life are used. We have a tree of life in our stained glass out front, in our front window. Two different ones. One is right side up, as we see a tree with our normal vision, but the other, curiously, is upside down. The upside down tree has its roots in heaven, and its trunk descends into earthly life and human affairs. It emanates out of a divine world of unity and light, and as it descends, its branches spread. This is an image of the soul as it moves into the world. Here in its spreading branches, we feather our nests and eat our worms. Well, no, I guess not, wait. Anyway, we live out our ordinary human lives. We have families and relationships and work. We run governments and educate children. We create art and music and literature, make scientific discoveries, heal the sick. We also suffer anxiety and ill health and betrayal. We destroy ecosystems and build empires on the broken backs of those who are less powerful, and lead the innocent into wars in which the suffering of the innocent ones is almost always the greatest. This worldly life, which we casually call secular, is actually the branching of a tree that has deep roots in the spiritual world. We all know what it means to grow up. Facing the unnerving challenges of youth as we move into adulthood. But take an imaginative leap with me for a moment. I propose that a far greater challenge, or okay, at least as great, confronting us as human beings is that of growing down. What does this mean? When a human being becomes aware that the end of his life was somehow mysteriously at work from the very beginning, she grows down, and the strong roots of the tree of the Kabbalah allow the branches to spread with the magnificence of depth. We grow down when we take an honest look into the depths of our hearts and our psyches to understand our motivations, our impulses, and internal contradictions, addictions, fess up to our flaws and our prejudices and our vulnerability and the wounds that we carry and inflict on others when we don't know what they're all about. This growing down makes integrity and wisdom and compassion even possible. We grow down into the fullness of our being, and though we remain fragile and faulty, we also become unique and authentic and holy. We grow down when a sense of our future destiny guides us in the living of our lives today. In times of crisis or points of radical change in our lives, such as a life-threatening illness or accidents, or the breaking of a bond with one we love, or some other traumatic event, people frequently describe that they have had a moment in which they experienced their lives flashing before their eyes. Though these moments are available to us anytime, probably, it is these crisis times that startle us into recognition and to remembering them. Suddenly, specific memories of people and conversations and events out of our life history surface with astonishing clarity and intensity. Why? Why do these moments stand out from others? We've had a lot of moments, guys. Why do we remember the ones we remember? Perhaps these are the transfigured moments, the moments which shine out of the past because they are the ones in which we respond to our fate, pulling us in one direction or another. These moments surface because they have a message for us. Jesus heard the call of his future. He knew his fate. He would suffer and be rejected by the authorities and be crucified. Jesus knew that he was living into the cross. When I reflect on the cross as a symbol of Jesus' fate, it again brings to mind that upside down tree of the Kabbalah. With its roots in heaven, Christ's suffering on this tree had purpose and meaning. Holy sacrifice was the destiny he was called to go down into. When someone we love dies, we sense the power of this moment at the end of life to awaken our dulled consciousness, to pause our frenzied pace. We feel a strong urge to speak about him or her, or to listen to others do so. A public eulogy goes far beyond honoring the life of an individual person being remembered. It reaches down deeply into the souls of all the people gathered. The end of a life awakens us to its transfiguring moments. When we speak of our remembered impressions of a cherished person, we are trying to express how their life journey was an attempt to be faithful to their destiny. This is how we honor them. A memorial to them that accomplishes this helps all the mourners grow down a bit more deeply into their own lives. I get married at every funeral. I do that all the time. I get married. I do that. I mix up funeral and wedding. We'll talk about that later. When we get into Marc's fire, and yeah. But what was I going to say? Anybody got a thought? Okay. Oh, and I get married at every wedding, and a part of me dies and resurrects at every funeral. I mean, it's really a personal experience. It isn't horrible grief like it is for the loved ones, but it is definitely an engagement with this thing that is bigger than us, this path of life. Jesus claimed his destiny and its spiritual power for his life. His followers sensed it. The chosen disciples saw it in the brilliant vision of the transfiguration on the mountain. We received it in the gospel accounts of his life and words. Jesus' awareness of his destiny transfigured his life. Our sensitivity and our faithfulness to our fate can transfigure our own. No matter how far along we are in years, we can ask, what are we still being called to see and to be in this life? Well, next Sunday is the first Sunday of Lent. Coming down the mountain is the soulful challenge that each of us has before us as we go through these few weeks of Lent. As we enter this season of the cross, a meditative season of the church year, I invite all of us to dwell on that image, the image of the tree of the Kabbalah. And like this upside down tree, branch out into our own depths and our own destiny. Amen.